You're the friend who turns down the group hang and feels relieved about it. You're the one whose ideal Friday is your apartment, a meal you made yourself, and nobody asking you anything for 6 hours. People around you describe this like it's a problem they're trying to politely not mention. To you, it's the closest thing to a full reset you have. And the strange part isn't that you prefer it now. The strange part is that you can trace it, almost exactly, to a specific kind of childhood you had. If you've spent your adult life noticing that being alone restores you in a way being around people never quite does, your psychology is doing something very particular. And it's almost certainly tied to a very specific kind of childhood, one researchers have studied for decades, but most people have never had named for them. The childhoods that produce adults who genuinely prefer their own company are not the lonely childhoods. They are something much more specific and much more useful than that. Here's the thing nobody talks about. Most kids grow up in childhoods built around constant external stimulation. Parents narrating every moment, scheduled activities, organized playdates, screens filling every quiet stretch. These kids develop nervous systems calibrated to a steady input of other people. As adults, they get restless and slightly hollow when they're alone too long. Their baseline is company. Solitude feels like withdrawal. But some kids grew up differently. You had stretches of unsupervised time, a room or a corner of the house that was reliably yours. Hours, sometimes whole afternoons, where the adults around you weren't asking anything of you and weren't trying to entertain you either. You learned, very early, that you could fill that time yourself. You read books, you drew things, you built worlds in your head. You walked around the yard talking to yourself about something you were figuring out. And nobody interrupted, because nobody was paying close enough attention to interrupt. Your nervous system got calibrated to a different baseline. Solitude wasn't punishment. It was the room where you became yourself. In 1958, British paediatrician and psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott published a paper called The Capacity to Be Alone. Winnicott argued that the ability to enjoy solitude as an adult is not a default state. It is a developmental achievement built in early childhood that requires a very specific condition. The child has to spend time alone while another trusted person is nearby but not engaged. Alone, but in the presence of someone safe. Winnicott called this paradoxical solitude. It's what teaches a developing nervous system that being unaccompanied is not the same thing as being unsafe. Decades of follow-up research have confirmed and extended this. A 2003 study by Reed Larson tracked teenagers across multiple settings and found that those who'd had regular access to autonomous time as children developed measurably stronger internal worlds, more original thinking, and a higher tolerance for being unsupervised. Solitude wasn't a wound they were working around. It was a skill they had quietly compounded for years before anyone noticed they had it. Picture this. It's the summer between 4th and 5th grade. You're 9 years old. The grown-ups are inside doing grown-up things. You're in the backyard or in your room or sitting on the back step. Nobody has scheduled this hour. Nobody's going to ask what you did with it. You have a stick or a book or just a particular thought you can't let go of. You spend 90 minutes turning that thought over from different angles. You build a small civilization in your head and tear it down again. You don't tell anyone about any of it. Most kids would have been bored. You weren't bored exactly. You were doing something nobody had a name for. You were learning what it felt like to be alone with yourself and have that be enough. That hour did more for who you became than most of the loud, organized, supervised hours of your entire childhood combined. But here's where it gets interesting. The childhoods that produce adults who prefer solitude are almost never the lonely ones. Lonely kids grow up craving the company they didn't have. Kids who had regular access to autonomous time with at least one trusted adult somewhere in the background grow up with the opposite pattern. They got both, safety and space. That combination is rare, producing adults whose nervous system treats solitude as restorative instead of threatening. But there's more going on than just early autonomy. These childhoods tend to produce adults with unusually well-developed inner worlds. The hours you spent alone as a kid weren't dead time. You were running internal experiments, building narratives, working out problems nobody had handed you. Researchers studying creativity have consistently found that the strongest predictor of adult creative work is not natural talent. It's hours of self-directed, unsupervised time in childhood. You weren't wasting those afternoons. You were laying down the infrastructure for an interior life most adults don't have access to. And here's the kicker. The same childhood that built your tolerance for solitude built your ability to think for yourself. Kids who spend hours alone with their own thoughts, without an adult narrating their experience back to them, develop a much stronger sense of their own internal voice. As adults, they're less susceptible to social pressure, less likely to abandon a position just because the room disagrees. You can tell when something is true to you and when it isn't, and this shows up in ways you might not even notice. People who prefer being alone often had childhoods where they were trusted, implicitly, to figure things out. Not abandoned, not neglected, just trusted. That trust gets internalized. As an adult, you handle problems without panicking. You sit with discomfort without immediately reaching for someone to help you process it. You can be in a situation with no obvious solution, and your first move is to go quiet and think, instead of going to other people to manage the feeling. That capacity didn't come from nowhere. It came from a kid who was given enough quiet to discover she could handle quiet. Now let's be honest. Not every quiet childhood was a healthy one. Some kids who learned to be alone were really learning to manage isolation, learning to soothe themselves because there wasn't a steady adult to do it. If your version of solitude as a kid was lonelier than restful, the reframe in this video doesn't apply the same way. The pattern this video is describing is the autonomous but supported one, not the isolated and unseen one. Both produce adults who prefer being alone, but they get there for very different reasons, and only one of them is actually the skill. But for the people whose childhood was the autonomous but supported kind, here's what you actually carry. You have a relationship with solitude that most adults will never develop. You can spend a full Saturday alone and end it feeling restored instead of restless. You can sit with a hard decision instead of immediately asking 5 friends what to do. You can hear what you actually think before the room tells you what to think. You can recover from a draining week by being alone for a few hours, while most adults need an entire vacation and still feel depleted at the end of it. That isn't antisocial. That isn't broken. That's emotional infrastructure quietly built when you were small by hours nobody else was tracking. The grown-ups in your life didn't always realize what they were giving you. They were just giving you space. You did the rest yourself. There's something quietly remarkable about adults who genuinely prefer being alone. They walk through ordinary days carrying a capacity for solitude the rest of the world has either lost or never built. They can sit with their own company for hours and find it interesting. They can read a long book in a quiet apartment and feel like the day was full. They can think a problem all the way through without needing to talk it out first. If you've ever wondered why being alone restores you while it drains other people, why a quiet Sunday feels like a gift instead of a punishment, this might be why. You had a specific kind of childhood. It gave you something most adults don't have. You've been quietly using it your whole life. You're not antisocial or avoidant or broken. You're someone whose childhood quietly built a capacity for solitude most adults will spend their whole lives trying to develop. And the version of you that needs an alone day to feel like yourself again is not a problem. It's the skill, working as designed. If this resonated, please subscribe to Silent Awareness. It genuinely helps the channel grow, and it lets you know when the next deep dive on the quietly different ways your mind works is ready. There's a lot more about you that nobody's named yet. Hit subscribe and the bell so you don't miss what comes next.